Well, let's get into it a little bit because I do think it's interesting. Um, do the Utah Jazz want to trade Lauri Markkanen? And this has been bandied about. It's been discussed multiple times. If the Jazz had their way, they would not. But it is very clear that Lauri Markkanen does not fit into their financial future. And if you are new to this show and you've not heard what we've talked about with the Jazz and Lauri Markkanen, a quick synopsis is the Jazz are in not spending money ever mode. Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, is supposedly a billionaire. I think that's on paper and in dreams. He is a guy that just bought a hockey team, heavily invests in BYU sports, and wants to tell you that he was a big part of the Olympics coming to Utah. Ryan Smith is not a guy that wants to spend money on this basketball team. Since he bought the team, point to me the contract where he gave somebody a max, where he extended somebody and paid them a significant amount of money. Jordan Clarkson, we've talked about this, and Jordan Clarkson was extended. And it's an absolute anvil around their neck right now.
Yep.
Because as Andy Larson in the Salt Lake Tribune reported, confirming what we've reported, Jordan Clarkson has no trade value.
Facts.
And you are stuck with him coming off of one of his most mid-normal, not very good seasons that we've seen out of Jordan Clarkson, who's a fantastic sixth man, but wants to be a starter. Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, has made mistake after mistake. And this organization for the last several decades has lived on, hey, dude, look at all our trade assets and look at all our draft capital and look how much cap space we have. And they have rarely, if ever, done very much with it at all. And you look at, especially since Ryan Smith bought this team, he did not do a Donovan Mitchell extension. He did approve the Rudy Gobert contract, but that was done before he bought the team from Gail Miller. Ryan Smith doesn't want to spend money. So now you fast forward to Lauri Markkanen. Lauri Markkanen is due for a renegotiation and an extension. He is making $18 million. This coming season, he needs to be paid at least, and I believe the number is $33.8 million in order to qualify for his largest available extension. The Jazz are not going to pay him $40 million a year on a 5-year deal. They're not paying Lauri Markkanen $200+ million. That's not happening. And it'll be interesting to see what happens here. What I have reported and what I have confirmed almost day after day. And I talked to a Jazz source yesterday who told me the Jazz, I think, would rather do business with the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs have better draft capital for the 2025 NBA draft and Cooper Flag than the Golden State Warriors do. To make a trade happen, the Golden State Warriors have to find a third team. And I was told yesterday by multiple NBA sources that the Golden State Warriors have not been able to go out and find a third team to make a deal, most notably to take the contract of Andrew Wiggins so that they can afford to extend Lauri Markkanen. They have not been able to do that. There is some conjecture about what the Jazz want in return from the Golden State Warriors. I was told yesterday that the Jazz are very much on the Podziemski bandwagon, and I was told multiple times that Golden State would rather trade Moody instead of Podziemski, that the Lakers do not want to trade Jonathan Kuminga, and they view Pods as a guy that they can have into the future. I don't know that that's enough to get a deal done. Moses Moody and a bunch of protected draft picks is not going to get you Lauri Markkanen, because as I have reported and now multiple national sources have picked up what I reported 10 days ago, the Jazz value quality in draft picks, not simply any old draft pick. They are aiming to, if they are going to trade Lauri Markkanen, they are going to do everything they can do to get Cooper Flag. And why wouldn't you? If you're going to give up on a guy like Lauri Markkanen, and I think the other name that you've got to pay attention to on this Jazz roster is Colin Sexton. And I continue to talk about this And you are starting to see, like Tony Jones from The Athletic yesterday in a Twitter conversation mention the fact that, Colin, I believe it was Tony said Colin Sexton's available. I've been telling you that for how long? That Colin Sexton's available. That the contract of Jordan Clarkson is not tradable at this point. The Jazz have put themselves in an unenviable position somehow, some way. And that is now that your best player, inarguably, is Lauri Markkanen. Yet you are in a spot where you don't have a whole lot of dance partners because A, your asking price is exorbitant. B, you are asking for unprotected 2025 first round picks that project to the lottery. That's what you are asking for. And you're in this position where you don't really value a whole lot of the talent that San Antonio has on their roster. Keldon Johnson is a guy that we've reported on this show that the Jazz do not value. Clearly, they do not value him the way they value Pods or Kuminga in Golden State. But if you can't get Pods or Kuminga, do you want Moody or do you want Keldon Johnson? I think that's a very interesting question because I don't think either one projects to be a top 5 player on a championship roster. I just don't see it that way, and NBA sources tend to agree with me on that. So, Jake, I think the Jazz very much want to trade Lauri Markkanen if they can get what they believe is fair value for him.
Well, that's always been the discussion with the Jazz is what's fair value. And whether it's, this Lauri Markkanen trade or any of the other trades that they've done or other situations that they found themselves in, it seems like the valuation of what the Jazz are going to get in return seems to hold up the deal. And I think that we've seen this play out. Like, the Jordan Clarkson situation, like they had opportunities to trade Jordan Clarkson before the extension situation came up and all that. I mean, there was plenty of talk about, hey, he wants to go to a championship contender. And so we've seen this story play out with the Jazz before. And I just think that you cannot, if you're the Utah Jazz, get into a situation where you don't trade Lauri and then you can't come to an agreement on an extension with Lauri because you're not willing to give him the money this upcoming season, right? That he needs, a 35 or 33.8. You're not willing to give him that money so that he can go and get a max. Because that's exactly what I think is worst case scenario for the Jazz. Hey, we couldn't get a trade done. We're really sweating giving, Markkanen the money this year so then he can go out and get that extension. And then ultimately what happens? That disenfranchises a guy like Markkanen, and they wind up going to other teams in free agency. I mean, we've seen this play out time and time again in the NBA, and it would not even be remotely surprising to me if that were to happen here. But I do think that the Jazz don't want to lose the opportunity to bring in all this draft capital. I think that that's what they value right now. They want to, build the war chest and they want to go big game hunting and they want to do these things. And I'm fine with it. But I just think that right now, what is today? The 26th, I believe it is. You've still got about a week or so here to play with before you really start feeling the pressure of that August 6th deadline getting here. And really it's August 5th, that deadline getting here. So, to me, I think this deal still gets done. I think it really comes down to what the Warriors can get done with a third team, because if they don't have a great third team helping them get this deal done, then I think you'll see the Jazz go with San Antonio.
Yeah, what do we think of Keldon Johnson? Because this is a conversation that I'm having more and more about. Do the Jazz value Keldon Johnson the way that most, fans, observers of the Spurs, there is a belief that Keldon Johnson is either really good or just an average ass player. I think it's somewhere in the middle. He lost his starters minutes last year, which I understand when you're building around a guy like Victor Wembanyama, you're going to make changes. You have to find the best fit. I don't believe, and this is just my opinion, I do not believe that Keldon Johnson is a guy where you're like, wow, this is a generational player. He's not that.
Yeah.
He does not have, and this I guess is debatable as well, he does not have the Kuminga upside. right? I mean, I think we're all kind of in the same spot on that. But you look at his numbers, and he's a guy that only started 27 games last year. He shoots the three well at 36% for his career. But when you take 1.5 less threes a game, you would expect your percentage to go up. It did last year. Is he a guy that's a bench player? Because it's not like his numbers paint that picture. I mean, he dropped 7 points last year, but he got fewer opportunities as a starter, and Victor Wembanyama is now the focal point of that offense. So you would expect everybody to eat less.
Mm-hmm.
So is he the guy that 2 years ago was not as efficient as you'd like at 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 dimes, but he only shoots 45% from the floor? Is that a guy that you value, taking 5 less shots a game? And his percentage overall did not change 1 iota. I don't think so. I don't believe, and I think I've heard this from Jazz sources for 2 weeks now. I don't believe the Jazz view him in the same light as a Podziemski or a Kuminga. And I agree with that assessment.
Well, I think that Podziemski and Kuminga are more polished players already, and they have higher upside.
I would agree.
But at the same time, you know, and this is maybe the reality check that the Jazz need to go through as an organization. I don't know, but like if you're getting a trade done where, let's say, Podziemski comes to you, are you going to be able to turn him into an all-star level point guard? Because that's the value, right? Are you going to be able to turn, Moody into more than what he is now, or Kuminga, or Keldon Johnson? Because that's my issue. I don't have
that's a great point.
I don't have a ton of faith.
That's a great point.
Like, we're sitting here trying to pick these guys apart and say who's got the bigger upside, and I haven't seen the Jazz turn one guy into an all-star. Like Donovan Mitchell, it was obviously an all-star, and Rudy had his all-star appearances, but I don't feel like we saw these guys take huge jumps in their time with the Jazz. I mean, Rudy was always going to be an elite rim protector. The guy rolled out of bed being able to block a shot, man. Like, it's not like you taught this dude how to rim run. The dude knew how to do that. Like, instinctually as a basketball player, he's got that in him. You didn't get more out of him. And whether it's Rudy, whether it was Don,
I think you have to give the Jazz credit for turning Rudy into an elite defensive player. The limitations on Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, that was the issue. And I agree with you on that. So if you bring in a Kuminga, Jonathan Kuminga really works in a run and gun offense. In a methodical half-court set, is Jonathan Kuminga the best option? Not right now. And if you bring him to Salt Lake City, does Jonathan Kuminga project to be a guy who you can say, man, I'm going to build an offense around that guy? I don't think he does. But if you're running and gunning, if you're playing summer league style basketball, Jonathan Kuminga is a guy you want on your team. If Jonathan Kuminga is your second best player in a smaller lineup, you want him on your team. I just don't think those are the lineups that win championships. I look at the way that Boston plays. Boston's got 3 really good guards, but I also think their bigs really made a difference for them. The Porzingises of the world, the Al Horfords of the world. And I don't believe that Jonathan Kuminga, and I use Boston because they won a championship, is Jonathan Kuminga ever on par with Tatum, Brown? Is he ever the contributor that Derek White is, regardless of position? I'm talking about contributing to a team.
Mm-hmm.
Does he ever make the Al Horford type contribution on a championship team? I don't believe that he does. So I look at Podziemski and I say to myself, well, Pods is a different kind of player. I think he projects to be a really good 3-point shooter. I think he can be an on the ball point guard. And I think that you look at the way that he benefits from playing next to Steph Curry. Does he benefit the same playing next to Keontae George?
No.
Well, clearly not. But can they grow together? Clearly they can. and maybe I'm the blind guy, but I've argued with NBA sources about this. I think Keontae George projects to be a solid 2 guard on a team like the Jazz for the next 5 years. I have no idea if he turns into a guy that can be one of your starting 2 guards on a championship team. I don't know that Key ever turns into that guy. But if you put a really good point guard, which he's never played with in his short time with the Jazz, if you put another guard next to him that has the skill set and the projection that a guy like Pods has, Keontae George is a significantly better player. And I think that's why you value Podziemski so much more than Kuminga, because I think Kuminga has a very low ceiling. Podziemski has a very high ceiling.
And by the way, if you're trying to go after Cooper Flag, doesn't Pods make a lot more sense?
It does. It does. And I think you look at, if you're trying to go after Cooper Flag, does Keldon Johnson make a lot of sense?
No.
And I also think this is why we need to go back on the Jazz to what's the rest of this roster look like? What does, if we look at the Colin Sextons of the world, if we look at, you think
Taylor
about
Hendricks, Cody Williams.
But I'm more talking about the veterans. I'm more talking about guys like a Jordan Clarkson.
Right.
What do you do with John Collins? What value do those guys have to this current incarnation of this team?
Well, I don't know that they have huge value because, again, this goes back to the direction conversation. It's hard for me to answer the question of what value does John Collins have because I don't know what direction you're heading. We're talking about the Jazz making a deal where you're sending out the best player on your team and you're going to get a B player back and a bunch of draft capital, which I'm fine with on its face. The premise of that is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But ultimately, when you look at, okay, well, what's the aftermath of that deal? Lauri's gone. You've got, Pods or, I don't think they do a deal that involves Keldon Johnson, but let's say it was Keldon Johnson. Like you've got that secondary player and a bunch of draft capital on this current roster. So what does that turn into? Okay, well, that turns into, now we've gone full into accepting that the young guys are going to play the lion's share of the minutes and we're going to be bad. And that's where I want the Jazz to kind of lean into that and say, hey, yeah, you know what? Like we're in a point in the rebuild arc, if you will, where, we need to get these guys minutes. We need to kind of water these plants and see which ones grows the quickest.
But here's the unspoken truth about this trade from the Utah side. You're going to be irrelevant in this town. Because I do believe that the Utah Utes are going to compete for a college football playoff spot. I think BYU is going to be incredibly relevant. I think the Utah Hockey Club is going to outshine the Utah Jazz for the entirety of the season.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be irrelevant. You are going to be a zero in this town. And if you make the Markkanen trade, there's at least a little excitement. If you don't make the Markkanen trade, you're flatlined. Because the truth is, I don't believe you can come to camp with the roster you have now because it does not fit your financial model. It just doesn't. And I think you are seeing, what is it today? The 26th. We're 10 days away from full swing football in this town.
Yeah.
And you then look at the NFL, which is already in camp. Do you guys understand that yesterday was the last Thursday without football on TV until February? You're already coming into that. This Jazz team has very little currency in the local market. This Markkanen trade is the only thing fans are hanging on to. And the excitement I think Jazz fans would be far more excited if you made the Keldon Johnson better draft picks, more access to Cooper Flag, than if you made a Golden State trade and you wind up with Moody and some really limited picks.
Right.
I think if you are the Jazz, you need to go all in on Cooper Flag. You need to go all in on Cooper Flag.
And I just don't know what other move you have. I mean, what else are you going to do? What else is the what is the next step for the Jazz moving forward? Because I feel like a lot of people ask us that, like, well, like, what are they trying to do? Like, where, like, I know they're trying to trade Markkanen, but like, where do you go from there? And I think
Well,
that's what everybody's trying to figure out. What are you guys doing after that? Because again, it's this whole thing where we've already seen the young guy weirdness start to play out with Walker Kessler. Like the idea that this guy was sitting on the bench for all that time is wild to me. Like this guy is good. This guy can play. He is a great rim runner. He needs to work on setting picks, but he's getting better at that. He's a great rebounder. Like he can impact the game, yet he's sitting on the bench. And so if you're going to make this deal and you're going to bring other guys in, I just, what's the priority for the dudes that are already here? Because if you have Kuminga on your roster, that's going to affect dudes like Taylor Hendricks. That's going to affect Cody Williams, and that's where I say, like, yeah, maybe Keldon Johnson isn't everyone's cup of tea, but ultimately I would rather give all those minutes to the young guys on your team. Whether you trade them or whether they're here is almost doesn't matter. You just need them to get better so you have options.
I would be playing Taylor Hendricks and Cody Williams every minute possible.
Yeah.
I would. If I were the Jazz, I would have traded John Collins already if they have not tried. I would never have extended Jordan Clarkson. That's where your owner meddled in the soup and
messed it up.
I think he screwed it up.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to wind up getting very little. If Sexton and Markkanen are not here and you do not have an unprotected first round pick that's lottery, that can reach the lottery, the Donovan Mitchell trade was a complete bust. Because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That is what we're talking about. The Jazz need more unprotected first round picks for 2025. They don't need top 12 protected. They don't need lottery protected. They need unmolested draft picks for the 2025 draft.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. Let's see where we're at. I see there's an argument going on about why we're talking basketball versus football. If you want football talk, come back another day. Or wait 32 minutes and we'll talk about Debo, Ayuk, and CeeDee Lamb. But this happens all the time on this show. And maybe it's just because we have a lot of new people that have come to the channel. I don't know. We always talk football on this show. And I love when idiots get in the comments section like, dude, you need to talk football. You need to go find another show because we're going to talk about what we want to talk about.